My stepmother once confided to my father that I was plotting to cut him out of his life, and so he decided to transfer our family home entirely to her children. When she assumed control of the property, she unearthed one small clause that turned everything on its head. I learned the house was gone from a phone call I never should have received. It was Mr. Landon, one of my dad's longtime friends, the kind of gentleman who always wore crisp shirts and never forgot birthdays. We hadn't spoken in years, yet that day his tone was tight. "I'm sure you know," he said. "He signed it over last week. The entire estate, everything, to her kids." My heart didn't plummet, or even flinch. It simply paused as if waiting for me to catch up. There was no call, no letter, not even a text. Our family home, the place where my mother once planted cherry trees in the yard, where we sat on the porch devouring watermelon in July, where I learned to ride a bike, had become the property of people who hadn't been in our lives 5 years ago. Not to me, not even in part to them. I think Mr. Landon ended the call, and sat there for a long moment. There had been silence. It started with the silence, with fewer return calls and increasingly vague excuses. My stepmom claimed I was too busy or that I didn't want to be bothered, things I'd never said. Then came the missed birthdays, the skipped holidays, the way my dad's will was altered without my knowledge, and finally, a letter arrived 6 months ago, a single neatly folded page typed out in a disappointed tone. It said, "I know what you've been planning. I never imagined you tried to erase me from your life after everything. I hope someday you grasp what true loyalty means." I read it over and over until I realized he had been swayed by her twisted version of events. She had reached him, and he let her. But here's what she never understood. I never clashed with her because I didn't crave her share of approval or attention. I only yearned for peace, and I knew that people like her ultimately dig their own graves if you stop feeding them ropes to hang on to. So I stepped back. Yes, it hurt. I'm no stone. But I learned that sometimes the kindest act you can do for yourself is to walk away from those who distort the narrative and cast themselves as the victim. She had been rewriting the past for years, sly barbs, underhanded remarks, reminding everyone that your dad worked 2 jobs just to send you to that fancy private school, insinuating that other kids were more fortunate to have caring parents. I once brushed it off, hoping it would fade, but instead it grew. She cornered my dad in front of me, scolding him for indulging me, rolling her eyes when I brought groceries, and tossing backhanded compliments with every gift he received. "Must be nice to spend that kind of money," she'd remark. And my dad would nervously laugh or silently agree, shrinking a bit each time she spoke. Somehow, I became the villain. After receiving that letter, I decided not to respond, not because I lacked words, indeed, I had plenty, but because I knew he wouldn't truly hear me as long as her voice filled his ear. A week later, I drove past the house, not sure if I was there to see if anything had changed or just to remind myself that it was still real. It looked smaller than I remembered. The shutters needed paint, the garden overrun with weeds, the cherry trees gone, cut down. I parked across the street and stared at the empty space where those trees once bloomed. I could still picture my mother in her gardening gloves, waving at me from under those branches. The absence was stark. Sitting in my car, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let her erase everything. It wasn't merely a house, it was memory, history, identity. It carried the aroma of Sunday morning pancakes, the creak of the back door, and the charm of that old rusted swing set, never fixed because it belonged to our past. It held the sound of my father's laughter before her influence muted him. I didn't want the property. I craved dignity. So, true to my nature when the ground shifts beneath my feet, I dove into research. I gathered every file, every document, every email exchange, every signature. Then I found it, a quiet clause my father and I had signed 12 years ago when he refinanced the property. It was drafted by a friend working pro bono, a brief line that granted me the right to live on the land indefinitely, unless criminal behavior occurred. It had never been revoked, even now that the title had been transferred. She might have convinced him to hand over the house, but she never bothered to read the fine print. For the first time in weeks I smiled. Not out of spite, but because I felt prepared. Let her move in, let them celebrate, let her think she'd won. There was something lurking in the deep, a twist she would never see coming. Perhaps, in time, she'd learn that you can inherit a house, but you can't erase a signature. While Garrett, a no-nonsense lawyer from a small strip mall with his trademark tie, handled the legalities, I took another step. I went to the county clerk's office to obtain a certified copy of the original deed, complete with all attachments. Standing in line behind a man paying property taxes and a woman arguing over permit fees, I received a folder with my name on it. I read it that night, not doubting Garrett's advice, but because it was deeply satisfying to see my name permanently inscribed in legal language, unchangeable without my consent. A few nights later, I got a call from my father, a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. His voice later came through. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this isn't right. You need to let this go, we've moved on." His tone wasn't angry, it was tired and resigned. "I'd bet my life on it," he added softly, referring to the steps I had taken. I didn't call back. Instead, I printed the easement clause, highlighting the key lines, and handed it over to Garrett. After scrutinizing the document once more, he said, "She has no idea what she's gotten herself into." I nodded. That was exactly the point. We quietly verified property transfers, examined contest periods, and reviewed county filings. In her haste and overconfidence, she had transferred the title without dissolving the pre-existing easement rights, details she likely overlooked. I documented everything meticulously. As her kids began posting selfies from the porch, and one of them, Connor, with his smug grin, made a TikTok about manifesting generational wealth, I saved every post. I wasn't angry. I was merely keeping track. She thought the ink was dry, but she hadn't noticed what else was inscribed beneath it. Soon enough, she would receive her first formal letter, and then she'd understand that while you can inherit a house, you can't erase someone's signature. While Garrett managed the legal proceedings, I reclaimed my presence. I visited the county clerk's office not for drama but to request a certified copy of the original deed with every attachment intact. I wanted tangible proof that my right to reside on the property was secured. That night, I reread the document over and over, absorbing the permanence of my claim. A few days later, my father finally called. "I don't know what you're doing," he said, voice laced with a mix of frustration and sorrow. "But this isn't right. You need to let it go." His tone wasn't harsh, it was weary. "I'd bet my life on it," he whispered, as if confirming something deeper. I didn't respond, my silence was a statement. Instead, I drafted a formal notice with Garrett. The letter was calm, legal, and straightforward, reaffirming the irrevocable easement agreement dated March 4th, 20XX, recorded under file number 18-0429. 3 days later, she received it. For a week, nothing happened. Then Garrett called with a grin, saying, "They got a new lawyer who sent a rebuttal. They claim the clause is vague." I raised an eyebrow. "Vague? It's one of the clearest easement agreements I've ever seen. Whoever your dad's friend was knew what he was doing." I almost laughed. "So what's next?" Garrett asked. "We remind them of what they legally agreed to and give them a deadline to comply," I replied. Compliance, in this case, meant acknowledgement, opening the door to reason. She still hadn't grasped that concept yet, but soon the champagne toasts on the porch, the family legacy hashtags, and even Connor's TikTok would vanish. Her daughter even removed the Instagram highlight titled "Our Home." Something was shifting. I imagined dinner conversations turning tense, panic seeping in, and the dawning realization that the story was far from finished, and the final chapter was not being written by them. On paper, they owned the home, but in the records, I still lived there. One day, I received a voicemail from my stepmom claiming that I was making things difficult and even accusing my mother of poisoning me against my father, a laughable claim, considering my mother had never spoken ill of him, even after his remarriage. That evening I called her. We didn't discuss the legalities. We just talked. I missed the cherry trees, I said. After a long pause, she replied, I miss them too, but you're still rooted, sweetheart. I realized I needed to hear that. 2 days after Garrett sent the deadline notice, there was a knock at my apartment door. Inside was a core envelope containing a letter from their attorney, written in a measured tone, less fire, more smoke. They requested a meeting. Garrett and I scheduled it for the following Monday on neutral ground, a small conference room near the courthouse. When we arrived, my stepmom and my father were already there. He looked older and thinner, as though stress had etched itself into his face. She didn't even look my way as we sat down. They made an offer, a sum of money in exchange for quietly surrendering my rights. Garrett slid the paper across the table. No, I said firmly. They tried again with a higher figure still. No. Finally, my father spoke. Is this really what you want to do? I met his gaze for the first time in years and replied, No, but it's what I must do. He nodded once and then lowered his eyes. My stepmom said nothing. As we left, Garrett whispered that they knew it was over. I exhaled deeply, feeling that it wasn't a fight at all. It was the truth finally being acknowledged. When the compliance deadline passed with no further contact, no new offers, no lawsuits, just silence, I showed up at the house. I didn't announce myself or knock. I simply used the legal keys I possessed. Pulling up, I saw a moving van parked halfway down the driveway, boxes scattered on the lawn, and voices coming from inside. I stepped out with nothing but a folder in one hand and my name in ink. Connor answered the door, blinking as if he couldn't place me. Can I help you? He asked, his tone cocky and almost amused. I didn't reply. I just moved past him. Hey, you can't just walk in here, he protested. Actually, I can, I calmly stated. His mother burst out of the kitchen, looking as though she hadn't slept in a week, clutching papers that likely contained more lawyer threats. You can't be here, she hissed. I handed her the folder. I think you'll find I can. She didn't open it. Instead, she turned to my father, who had been sitting silently in the corner. Our eyes met briefly. He looked away. I walked through the hallway as if returning to a museum I once loved, the scent of old wood, dust in the curtains, and the familiar creak of the stairs echoing memories of my mother's gentle presence. This wasn't revenge. It was reclaiming what was mine. She followed, furious. You think this makes you noble, coming back as if you're owed something? She spat. No, I replied calmly. I'm not owed anything. I'm simply exercising a right you forgot to honor. I paused in the living room, observing how one of her kids had already replaced old family photos with his own. I carefully took them down, respectfully. You don't belong here, she snapped. I turned to her, meeting her glare. I do now. That night, I stayed in the guest room that still carried the scent of cedar and thyme. The blankets were rough, the walls thinner than I remembered, yet I slept deeply, without dreams. In the morning, I made coffee in the old French press, my mother's, the one I'd discovered tucked away behind her modern espresso machine. I cleaned it, brewed it, and poured myself a cup. When she came downstairs, she paused in the doorway, shocked to see me in the kitchen as if I'd always belonged there. I'm not leaving, I said. You'll get used to it. Later that day, she called her lawyer in a dramatic, loud manner. I continued reading on the porch as she paced, her voice sharp and high. I heard my name uttered more times that day than in the previous 5 years. Meanwhile, Garrett informed me that their attorneys were now trying to reinterpret the clause, claiming it applied only under certain residential conditions. Let them stretch it, I said. The rubber band snaps when it's pulled too far. My father remained silent for days, and once, when I caught him watching me from the hallway, he quickly looked away. I saw something in his eyes, neither anger nor regret. Her children openly despised me, whispering behind closed doors, slamming doors, even attempting to lock me out of shared spaces. I wasn't here to play their petty games. Instead, I quietly fixed what they ignored, a leaky faucet, a broken porch step, squeaky hinges. I mowed the lawn. Neighbors stopped by, some even sharing casseroles and fond memories. Mrs. Finch next door mentioned she missed my mother's laugh, which used to resonate through the screen windows in summer. Mr. Howard from down the block handed me an old photograph of my dad and me covered in paint after a summer garage door painting. I hadn't seen that picture in over 20 years, and I hung it in the hallway once again. The cherry trees began to take root swiftly. I watered them daily, talking to them as though they were family. One evening, as the sky turned the color of forgiveness, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and read my mother's old journal, a secret treasure I'd found behind attic insulation. She had written about me, about Dad, about the home. One entry read, "I hope this place outlives us. I hope it reminds him of love even when life tries to rewrite it." Now, with the lies peeled away, the paper told the truth, and so did I. I didn't need apologies or explanations, I just needed the keys. And now I had them. That afternoon, I planted 2 cherry trees in the front yard, one for her, one for me. This time, the roots were mine, and I wasn't going anywhere. In the weeks that followed, the house continued to transform, or perhaps it was I. I repainted the front door the same blue it once was in my childhood, fixed the lattice under the porch, power washed the siding, and gradually, the house began to resemble something earned rather than something merely inherited. Neighbors started stopping by again, their quiet hellos blossoming into full conversations. Some brought casseroles, others memories. One night, as the cherry trees flourished, I listened to the wind chime at the corner where my mother once planted secrets that still somehow bloomed. I resolved to remain, not for revenge, not solely for memory or peace, but for my roots. "I'll buy them out," I declared. Every square inch of the property, I would reclaim. Garrett's approving smile over the phone confirmed it. On a rainy Thursday, without any dramatic ceremonies or confrontations, signatures were re-signed, wire transfers made, and silence restored. At 10:17 a.m., Garrett texted me, "It was done." I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I stood at the kitchen sink, watching water patter on the window, letting stillness settle. My stepmother had already left the day before, quietly, before sunrise, without fanfare. Her kids followed a few hours later, boxes packed, U-Hauls hauling belongings, doors slammed. The porch was finally quiet again. Legally and spiritually, the house was mine. I walked through it slowly, room by room, each step a journey through memory. I visited the back bedroom where my mom once hummed while folding laundry, the hallway where my father hung his Sunday ties, and the worn stair step where I sat for hours after my first heartbreak. I didn't cry, I simply breathed. I retrieved the family photo from the attic, the genuine one, not the one the kids had replaced, and hung it above the fireplace. It felt right. That night, I left the windows open, letting the rain's melody fill the room. I dreamed of nothing and woke feeling something I hadn't felt in years: home. The next morning, I arose before sunrise, not out of habit or anxiety but in peaceful anticipation. I brewed a cup of rich, strong coffee in my old French press, sitting in the same spot my mother once did, gazing over the yard. The house now felt different, not merely quiet, but settled. The tension in the walls had dissipated. I no longer held my breath around every corner. It was as if the absence of her presence was replaced by the unmistakable presence of honesty. I spent that day tending to the small details: a new doorknob on the pantry, tightened cabinet hinges, open windows letting in fresh air. I walked the perimeter of the yard, noticed how wild the grass had grown in places, and remembered how my mother used to run her fingers along the tall blades as though reading a secret language. In the garage, I found an old box of my father's tools. Inside, wrapped in a worn cloth, lay the small silver hammer I'd used when I was 10, a gift for helping him build the shed. I held it for a long moment around noon. Later, the mail arrived: bills, catalogs, and a letter from him. His stiff, familiar handwriting read, "I don't expect forgiveness, but know that I remember everything: the cherry trees, the pancakes, your mother's laughter. I now see what I allowed to happen. I was weak. I let someone rewrite you, though I always knew who you were. I just didn't know how to come back." I folded the letter carefully, neither burning it nor shedding tears. I placed it in a drawer alongside the deed, past and present together at last. That afternoon, I planted 2 more cherry trees in the front yard, one representing what was left of her, and one symbolizing me. This time, the roots were mine, and I wasn't going anywhere. In the following weeks, as the house continued to evolve, I repainted the front door that nostalgic blue, repaired the lattice beneath the porch, power washed the siding, and slowly the home transformed from an inherited relic into something I had truly earned. Neighbors returned with warm greetings and shared memories. Mrs. Finch remarked on how much she missed my mother's laugh, while Mr. Howard surprised me with an old photograph of my dad and me covered in paint after a summer project. I hadn't seen that picture in over 20 years, and I proudly displayed it again. The cherry trees took root rapidly. I watered them daily and spoke to them as if they were old friends. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with hues of forgiveness, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and read through my mother's journal, a hidden treasure tucked away behind attic insulation. She had written about me, about Dad, and about our home. One entry read, "I hope this place outlives us. I hope it reminds him of love even when life tries to rewrite the past." With the lies finally peeled away, the truth was clear: paper never lies, and neither do I. I didn't need an apology or for them to understand. I just needed the keys. And now, I had them. In the end, I realized that reclaiming my home wasn't about exact revenge. It was about reclaiming my identity. I walked through the house room by room, each step a reunion with memory. I replaced broken fixtures, fixed creaking hinges, and opened windows to let fresh air dissolve the suffocating past. The small details added up, and soon the house felt like mine again. The neighborhood buzzed back to life with friendly chats and shared casseroles. The legacy wasn't about bitterness, it was about the roots that still held strong. That rainy Thursday when the final signatures were made, the transfer complete with wire transfers and mutual silence, I received a text from Garrett at 10:17 a.m. It was done. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I lingered at the kitchen sink, letting the steady patter of rain bring a sense of calm. My stepmother had departed quietly before sunrise, and her children followed soon after. The porch lay silent. Legally, spiritually, the home was mine. I strolled through every room, the back bedroom where my mother's soft humming filled the space, the hallway that once displayed my father's Sunday ties, and the worn stair where I nursed my first heartbreak. I didn't cry, I simply exhaled. I retrieved the original family photo from the attic, carefully removed the kid's replacement, and hung the authentic frame above the fireplace. It felt right. That night, I left the windows open to let the rain's gentle song in. I slept soundly and woke feeling something I hadn't in years, a profound sense of home. The following morning, before sunrise, I brewed a cup of that rich, strong coffee in the old French press, just like my mother did, and sat where she once sat, looking out over the yard. The house wasn't just quiet now, it was serene. There was no lingering tension, no need to hold my breath around every corner. It wasn't only the absence of her voice, but the presence of something else, honesty. Over the next few days, I dedicated myself to the small details, replacing a broken doorknob, tightening squeaky cabinet hinges, and letting the fresh air in by opening all the windows. I strolled around the yard, noticing how the wild grass told stories of resilience, just as my mother's gentle touch once did. In the garage, I rediscovered an old box of my father's tools. Inside, wrapped in a faded cloth, was the small silver hammer I'd received when I was 10, a keepsake from the day I helped him build the shed. I held it for a long while, letting the memories settle in. Later that day, as I sorted through the mail, I found bills, catalogs, and a letter from him. His stiff, familiar handwriting confessed, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I remember everything, the cherry trees, the pancakes, your mother's laughter. I see now what I allowed to happen. I was weak, I let someone rewrite you, though I always knew who you were. I just didn't know how to come back." I folded the letter, neither burning it nor crying, and placed it alongside the deed in a drawer, a tangible record of both past and present finally united. That afternoon, I planted 2 more cherry trees in the front yard, one representing what remained of her, and one symbolizing me. This time, the roots were mine, and I wasn't going anywhere. In the weeks that followed, the house continued to evolve. I repainted the door in that nostalgic blue, repaired the porch lattice, power washed the siding, and gradually the home transformed from an inherited relic into something I had genuinely earned. Neighbors returned with warm greetings and shared memories. Mrs. Finch mentioned how much she missed my mother's laugh, while Mr. Howard surprised me with an old photograph of my father and me, covered in paint from a summer project. I hadn't seen that picture in decades, and now it hung proudly in the hallway once again. The cherry trees grew rapidly, nurtured by my daily care and the quiet conversations I had with them. One evening, as the sunset spilled colors of forgiveness across the sky, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and reread my mother's journal, long hidden behind attic insulation. In it, she wrote about love, loss, and the hope that our home would outlive us all. "I hope this place reminds him of love even when life tries to rewrite everything," one entry read. Now, with the falsehoods peeled away, the truth stood firm. Paper never lies, and neither do I. I didn't need them to apologize or understand. I only needed the keys. And at last I had them. In reclaiming my home, I wasn't seeking revenge. I was recovering my identity. Every room I walked through echoed with memories and reclaimed history. I fixed what had been broken, opened every window to invite in fresh air, and slowly, the house began to feel like a home I had truly earned. Neighbors came back with warm hellos and full conversations. The legacy of my family was not about bitterness but about the unbreakable roots that held us together. Now, as I stand here, with the signatures, transfers, and final silence behind me, I know the truth can never be rewritten. The house is mine, not just legally, but in spirit. And with every repaired nail, every opened window, and every new cherry tree planted, I am reclaiming the home that was always meant to be mine.